All right, we're here. Twitch.tv/110sports, 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday. Chris Brown is here with me. Josh Doring is here with me. I'm just now noticing that on your screen it says Chris Brown is Josh Doring and Josh Doring is Chris Brown, but Chris is in the red, Josh is in the blue. We're all here. Guys, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. We made it to Friday. We got some great football to watch this weekend. The next 3 days, right? We have a couple of great days of sports, so I'm looking forward to it. Feeling pretty good.
Yeah, this is the football time of the year. National championship game, start of the NFL playoffs, super duper edition of NFL Wildcard Weekend.
You know what it's usually not, though? It's usually not that one of the biggest storylines the week of January 7th is a baseball story. But that might be the case this year. Now, of course, all of the talk shows are spending all of their time talking about football. And for the most part on today's show, that's what we'll be talking about. We'll talk wild card predictions, wild card weekend, wild card confidence in the second segment of the hour here, and then do some predictions for the rest of the NFL playoffs to round out the show. But we're going to start with the Indians. If there's anything that you can count on in this world, it's death, taxes, and the Indians getting rid of their best players because they want to save money. That's pretty much the three things that you can count on nowadays. And this week, the Indians continue to very much fit into that description, and the Mets fitting into this description of we're going to go spend money. We have this new owner. He has all the money in the world. We've got the cash to do it. We're going to go do it. The first big blockbuster trade, Francisco Lindor, of course, the headline of that. Now a Met, and now the Mets are not just a playoff contender, but a World Series contender. Mr. Brown under the Josh Doring tab here as our resident baseball expert. Your reaction to this trade, how it went down, and any takeaways you have from it.
Yeah, so initially a lot of similarities between this and what happened last offseason with Mookie Betts, right? It's last offseason, it was Betts, the face of the Red Sox, being traded to the Dodgers. He had 1 year left on his contract. He ended up signing, of course, a huge extension with the Dodgers, and he's going to be a Dodger for years and years to come. He had a great first season there, and of course, they won the World Series. Lindor, a similar situation in that you have another face of the franchise player who was traded with 1 year left on his contract. The part that we don't know yet is whether he'll get locked up long-term with the Mets, but you have to believe there's a pretty good chance of that happening under their new ownership. They've committed to spending money like a big market team. Their new owner and their president have indicated that this might be a route that they might try to go instead of signing a huge player in free agency, would be to make a trade and then extend that player long term. So it seems very likely. Nothing's done until it's done. As far as Lindor is only under contract for one more season, but he, like you said, Josh, he helps transform this team from a playoff contender to a World Series contender, because that's how much of an impact he makes. Since he came into the league, he's been one of the most valuable players in baseball. According to Fangraphs WAR, he's been the fifth most valuable player in baseball since he made his major league debut. He is a dynamic talent on both ends of the ball. He's a five-tool player. He has speed. He has great defense. He hits for power. He hits for average. I mean, he can pretty much do everything, and he helps transform this Mets team in a big way, even if it is just for 1 year. I'm not expecting it's just for 1 year, but even if it is just for 1 year, it's going to be one exciting year. My other quick thought off the top is that I think it shouldn't be forgotten, or not forgotten, but it's important to note the other big piece the Mets get in this, which is Carlos Carrasco, the starting pitcher, veteran starting pitcher. He came back. He won the Sporting News comeback player of the year. He came back from a leukemia diagnosis to pitch really well, really reliable starter for the Indians this past season. He is not an ace, but he's a really quality 2 or 3 arm in your rotation, and he's under control for at least 2, if not 3 more seasons, because there's an affordable team option at the end of that. So that's a big part of it as well. That's something where maybe that they're not really that interested in Trevor Bauer anymore. It could still happen, but that's something where that rotation looks a lot better. That offense is significantly better. And like you said, Josh, the Indians continuing to tear it apart. Um, you know, I mentioned this in an article that I wrote that just came out last night. 2 years ago, when the Indians won 91 games, they had four pitchers who started at least 25 games that season. Corey Kluber, Trevor Bauer, Mike Clevenger, and Carlos Carrasco. Every single one of those has been traded away in the last 2 years for the main purpose of saving money, and an ownership group that has prioritized dramatically cutting payroll over fielding a competitive baseball team. And this was sort of the final major step in plunging them into that full rebuild mode, if you want to say. That's sort of assuming that there's a plan to get them back to prominence, something that's not really going to happen with a $35 million payroll. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the long-term plan is. You have to feel bad for Indians fans, but you can't feel bad for that front office, because what they're doing is a deliberate decision.
I mean, Shane Bieber's got to be next, right?
He's still cheap, so probably a few years from now.
yeah. Not that they're going to move him now, but
or Jose Ramirez.
By the time they get good, the couple solid pieces they still have, I just find it hard to believe you can justify keeping them if you're not willing to keep any of these other guys. Part of me really wants to see the Mets go finish this thing off with George Springer. It's hard for me, and getting Carrasco is huge, as you mentioned, Chris, because with the injuries they have in that rotation and Syndergaard's inability to stay healthy and the fact that he's currently not healthy, in addition to what you're facing in Atlanta and in LA, even in Philly to a certain, and in that division, the Marlins, the Phillies, there's just part of me that still has a hard time thinking that this group is a true, and it's a sort of top tier World Series contender, I guess I'll say. Because by definition, if you get into the playoffs, you're a World Series contender, and this team absolutely should make the playoffs. I would just like to see, and this is also a long-term thing, which goes to the point you made about, can you lock Lindor up? You've got multiple years of control of Carrasco. Can you sort of build it that way? But unless you can get a Lindor extension done quickly, there's just no guarantee. So there's part of me that wants to see them finish this off now and go get Springer on top of it, because then you're really talking about something. And it makes it that much more likely that Lindor is going to want to stay.
Does George Springer make you feel that much differently about the Mets? Like, are you going to pick the Mets over the Dodgers and the Braves with George Springer?
No, but I would put him in that category.
Okay.
I think they're a tier below right now.
I also think you're being unfair to the Mets, who just went and did exactly what going and getting Steve Cohen was meant to do. I mean, it's, one thing at a time here, but
sure.
There are more, right? This won't be the first time ever that the Mets have had a roster that you think is capable of making some serious noise in the playoffs. I'm very much in the position of, I don't care how good your offense is if your pitching staff can't stay healthy and help you win a 7-game series like that, because by the time you get deep into the playoffs, I'm actually a bigger fan, to a certain extent, to the extent that you can be a bigger fan of the second part of this trade, and the fact that Carlos Carrasco is now also a Met. Of course, like you said, Chris, Francisco Lindor is not only one of the most exciting players in baseball, he's one of the most productive and the most valuable. You said he was, right, top 5 since he came into the league in wins above replacement. So, of course, to a certain extent, you're not allowed to be more excited about Carlos Carrasco than you are about Francisco Lindor. But I'm much more, I think the concerns I have about the Mets are certainly there to a certain extent. And of course, getting Lindor just raises the ceiling of your talent so much. on the offensive side of the baseball and, at the shortstop position. But having somebody like Carrasco to be, like you said, Chris, you don't need him to be the ace on of a pitching staff that also has Jacob deGrom and Noah Syndergaard and Marcus Stroman, and you have so many arms here. You just need him to be the guy that you can always depend on to give you a quality starter, give you 5 innings, and just add depth to that rotation. Because, right, as good as Syndergaard is, he's leaves much to be desired on the staying on the field side of his career. And so I'm a huge fan of that part of this. Of course, you'd love to see them actually go after Lindor and really go after it and do what Steve Cohen said he was going to do. I'm just a fan of that, and I'm a fan of an owner in baseball actually making winning a priority and not their financials a priority.
Mm-hmm.
There are no owners in sports that value money the way that baseball owners value money. There's a difference between just wanting to always make a profit and doing things because of this pandemic. And like Chris pointed out in his story, that this is something the Indians have been doing for years. This isn't a response to COVID-19. That part drives me crazy, that they're just baseball owners that are clearly just interested in making sure they're in the green rather than winning baseball games. So why the heck are you the owner of a baseball team? But I'm really excited about this for the Mets. Yes, Lindor, but also to add an arm like that in your rotation really gets me excited and really changes some of my thoughts about the Mets. But I think to a certain extent, you're right. I'm not going to pick the Mets over the Braves and the Dodgers. The Dodgers, who will easily have the best roster in baseball again next year, and we haven't even gotten to the Padres, who have also put together a really impressive offseason and gotten just as good with the Mets, or at this point maybe even better than the Mets,
Mm-hmm.
if they get the version of the team that they got last year and have a healthy pitching rotation. But it certainly puts them into that conversation. And if you gave me 5 teams that my 5 World Series contenders, maybe they're right on the outside looking in if you're talking about the Dodgers and the Braves and the Padres and the Yankees. But they're very, very close, if not in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there's a good chance. I would be surprised if the Mets are done making notable moves. Now, I would not be surprised if we look back and say that, and we see that they didn't add Springer or Bauer or LeMahieu. But there's still plenty of opportunities for this team to make improvements in that sort of second tier free agents too, if they decide to go that route. They've apparently been in touch with Jackie Bradley Jr., who could be a really good fit. Like, their big need right now is center field. And there was, of course, a few weeks ago, it seemed like they were getting really close to signing Springer. It also seems like his asking price right now is what I would consider really high for a guy of his age. He's not 28, he's in his 30s. So it seems like maybe they don't go that direction. Maybe they go with Jackie Bradley Jr. or something like that instead. But there's still a lot of ways for this team to upgrade given what's on the market, which a big part of what's still on the market is because there are just so few teams that are actually putting in that money or willing to commit money to compete right now. We've only seen a few teams, right? We've seen the Padres do it. We've seen the White Sox do it to some extent, a little bit. We've seen, right, the Mets are doing it, but you can count on one hand the number of teams that you can actually say are committing to spending big dollars this offseason, and it would take you probably 3 or so hands to count the number of teams that you can definitively say right now are taking an approach of trying to cut costs drastically this offseason. So it's a perfect opportunity for several teams, whether it be the Mets to continue making moves, the Padres to continue making moves, or other teams to step up given the situation and say, this is our time. It's really easy it's not too hard to drastically improve your roster this offseason. I think that's becoming clear. And I guess I'll say this as well. I'm with you in really liking the Carrasco aspect of this deal, as I said, because to some extent, he's the only player who's still going to be on the Mets year 2 and potentially year 3,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's still, right, until Lindor signs on the dotted line, you just don't know. Now, I'm hopeful that he will sign with the Mets long term, but Carrasco is the part that is going to be there for a little while.
Right.
And the upside is that you go into a postseason series and your Mets starting rotation is the Jacob deGrom, one of the top 2 or 3 pitchers in the game, if not the best pitcher in the game right now. Marcus Stroman, uh, Noah Syndergaard's back, and you have Carlos Carrasco, and that's your 4 starters. I mean, that's your dreams. That's almost a dream scenario, and it's not crazy. Syndergaard's expected back sometime this summer in his return from Tommy John surgery. So obviously you don't can't guarantee it, and these guys are a lot of them are injury prone, but that's your upside. And then Lindor on his own, I think it's just one of those things where we saw it with Betts last year, so maybe we're kind of getting used to it, and to some extent. But the idea of a player of that caliber switching teams, it doesn't happen that much in baseball these days. Like it happens more sometimes in other sports, but a player who's really one of the top 10 overall players in the game just doesn't switch teams all that often. And Lindor on his own is worth 5 or 6 wins. I mean, this is sort of like, I mean, this is a stat based observation, but you can even just sort of the eye test himself is worth 5 or 6 wins to a team that he is on.
Mm-hmm.
The Mets haven't had a player like that since David Wright in his prime. So there's something to be said for just that level of talent. You go from just acquiring great players to when you acquire one of the very best position players in the game, it's going to help you in more than just, marginally. There's few players that are worth that much value to a team in baseball, in particular, because of the way the sport is. So when you can land one of those players who's worth several wins to your team every season, that's a huge thing. I'm just really curious to see, does it follow the Mookie Betts sort of situation? There's the season starts only a few months from now. So is there a deal before then? Otherwise, they're going into the season, you're not knowing whether Lindor's back or not. So that's, of course, the big question now.
And I know I went right to the Springer thing and wanting to see them really cap this off, but to your earlier point, Josh, the most important part of this is that Steve Cohen came in and sent a message right away, gave his team, his fan base something to be excited about other than I have a lot of money and I'm saying a lot of things. He's delivered a team that you should be excited to watch. And Chris and I talked about this a little while back. Finally, Jacob deGrom has some help. That we got to get him and Mike Trout into the playoffs and on teams that make them be excited to go to work every day and continue to perform at the level that they are. So I'm happy in that aspect too. And the other interesting thing here for me is, does somebody in the American League want to step up besides the Yankees, who are always there?
Yeah.
Right? Talk about all the teams that we just mentioned.
The Rays got rid of all their players too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The Rays sent away Snell. So I have questions about the Yankees in the playoffs. They still haven't figured their pitching rotation out. They got things they need to solve. Then you're talking about
Astros have concerns because if they lose Springer and Brantley and Reddick, they're losing their entire starting outfield.
Plus Verlander is still on the mend. You don't know exactly how that's going to turn out. We're talking about the A's. I mean, I
would probably take
Twins.
The AL Central against the rest of the AL. Against the
White
rest of the
Sox
AL.
Twins?
The White
Sure.
Sox are the Twins right now in terms, and especially in terms of really convincing me that you're trying to win baseball games right now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Of course, I have questions about Tony La Russa, but if there's anything that Tony La Russa is, it's proven. And going and getting a guy that's 1,000,000 years old and proven as a manager, to me, screams nothing but we're trying to win right now. Now, there are
on top of the moves that they've also made to build this team. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
The Twins, they're not exactly right. They haven't had to they've sort of built this team, recently, and they haven't gone and made any, super massive trades. So it's not like, but they're also not giving away players.
Right.
So, because Houston's just getting to the point where they're old, and the old relatively speaking, but clearly we're on the back end of this Astros run of AL dominance. Like you said with the Yankees, they'll be the most talented team in the AL again, but it's not like they've turned that into representing the AL in the World Series anytime recently. Honestly, if you gave me the AL Central against the field, I'd probably take the AL Central at this moment.
Yeah, I think I would too. It's such a strange dynamic because you have like the teams that are actually showing a willingness to try to compete um, this offseason to really spend money are NL teams.
Mhm.
And then the AL, you have these teams just sort of hovering there with questions. And then it's so strange to me, and I know I've brought this point up a million times, so I won't make it very long. But you have the NLs where these teams are trying to actually compete, except for it's really the NL teams on the coasts that are actually trying to compete because the
Mhm.
NL Central is a complete disaster right now.
Mhm.
So it's such a strange thing where I think you look and you say your best teams in baseball, you might say, and I'm trying to think of this off the top of my head, you might say four of the top six are in the National League or something to that
Yeah.
effect. The top tier teams, the majority of them are NL teams, but then you look and you say, but then at the bottom, I'd also say probably five of the worst seven teams in the majors are also in the National League at the same time.
Mhm.
There's such a like a it's such a strange dynamic where the NL is just like really top heavy and then really bottom heavy.
Yeah.
It's sort of there's very few teams in the middle, and then you have the AL where you have just a bunch of teams that are just sort of like hovering there, and it's just so strange because you could have a situation where the Yankees or the Astros all of a sudden there's enough free agents out there that this all could change. Like not incredibly, like we're not going to be talking about different favorite teams to win the World Series. But there's just so many impact free agents out there that some team, the Blue Jays, could go out there and sign Springer and Bauer, and all of a sudden, who knows? Because these guys are still out there. Until these guys are off the board, we just don't know exactly how it's going to play out. So that's sort of a weird factor in it all as well.
Really, it's just that the Major League Baseball front office, it needs their frequent flyer miles, so they're going to be flying back and forth. They're going to get all of them during the World Series when you got a team in New York playing a team in LA, and we'll just get our 10,000 frequent flyer miles between those two but in that series. But Lindor going to the Mets, and like you said, Chris, a much appreciated move to see an owner go and spend money and an owner value winning over other things, which is refreshing because over the last year we haven't seen a whole lot of that from baseball ownership. Coming up next, we're gonna do Wild Card Weekend. If we had to bet our lives on these playoff games and the results of them, the order in which we would bet on those games, we'll do that. We'll do picks and go deeper into the playoffs in the last segment. You're watching 110 Daily on a Friday on 110sportsmedia.com.